Good day, class. Today we are going to take a look at population statistics. We are still on the topic resources, and we are still on the human resource aspect of this topic. Population statistics and use of population statistics. Now, the purpose of population statistics is to help the government to understand the relationship between the resources the country can provide and the needs of the population. Overpopulation is when there are insufficient resources to the number of people, whereas underpopulation is when the available resources can support a larger population size. So, population statistics is gathered basically via government censuses somewhere between 4 to 5 years. Okay, so basically, apart from the purpose for election and so forth that people sometimes assume it is for, it is also to understand the wealth of the country, the things like GDP, etc. Right? Gathering information for taxation purposes, and to understand basically the resources that we have and if it can provide for the needs of the population and what are the present needs of each community. If we need to build, if the government would need to build more schools, if the government would need to build more health facilities, other infrastructure like roads, provide light, water, etc. for different communities based on the population growth, right? So overpopulation is when you have insufficient resources. Now, sometimes I use the example of a home where you have too many people living in a home for very few resources. Now, the resource will be basically what is needed in the home, right? Basically like food, education, healthcare, all of these things are needed in a home. And some homes are not able to provide all of these things to the number of people because of the few resources is that is in the home. For instance, if you have one parent working or nobody working at all. Okay? So therefore the home itself can be overpopulated. A country can be like a home. A country can also become overpopulated with very little resources to actually make sure that education, healthcare, provision of proper roads, drainage, sanitation, etc. is taken care of. Okay. However, on the other side, you can have underpopulation when the available resources can support a larger population size. Right? So we have Caribbean countries where you have underpopulation and they actually encourage citizens from around the Caribbean and around the world to come and live there so that they can provide means of shared information, shared skills, etc. So population statistics also allows the government to analyze the structure of the current population size to manage and utilize resources for the good of its citizens. Okay, so that government will be able again to assess what citizens actually need based on age, etc. Population statistics allows for planning related to a number of fields. Sometimes through population statistics, government can know if they need to provide more housing, as right, and healthcare, as we mentioned before, education, like build more schools, employment, social welfare, and infrastructure development. Infrastructure development would be like roads, drainage, etc. Okay, and light, water, etc. Right, so the government will be able to know these things through statistics. Now, development of human resources is very important because in our first tutorial on resources, one of the things that I mentioned is to ask yourself one important question. Which one is more important? Is physical resources, physical and natural resources, more important than human resources, or vice versa. Human resource is very, very important because you can have a wealth of natural resources, and if you don't have proper human resource to harness that wealth, therefore you would not be able to get the wealth for yourself. Somebody else could come and harness that wealth. And I should change that word from somebody else to, in our Caribbean society, another country can actually come and harness that wealth, especially where countries have mineral resources like oil and gas, etc. They have been taken advantage of in the Caribbean, where other um, multinational corporations from developed nations such as the United States of America or Britain have come to the Caribbean and actually harness our resources, not only in Trinidad and Tobago but in other Caribbean islands, and have harnessed the resources, and we have been only able to access wealth through taxation and through employment, etc. Okay, so developing human resources is very important so that we can be innovative, like create different avenues for employment besides being dependent on one resource like oil and gas, or in different countries whatever they are dependent on, tourism, etc. But we can be innovative to access other resources that are situated in our country, whether it be natural or physical resources, and be able to harness other resources and create wealth and foreign exchange. Okay, as I said before, to create wealth, be innovative. So developing human resources, the first aspect to consider is that they can become innovative to create wealth and to create a new source of wealth, to develop new natural resources, okay, to create wealth for their country. Wealth, by extension, creates more employment, and looking even further, creates a means of harnessing foreign exchange and wealth for your society. Okay, so that's one aspect of it, and the other aspect, development of human resource, also helps the individuals of your own country, whether it is they become engineers or what have you, that they can actually harness the wealth of their own country that is already being harnessed. Okay, so that our own citizens can learn to harness our oil and gas, our bauxite, our diamond, our gold, etc., instead of foreign countries coming in to do this. Okay, so part of the government's role is to develop the human resource by helping individuals reach their full potential and to make a positive contribution to society. Now, two essential elements to develop human resource will be health and education. I'm going to repeat that again because this is very important. Two essential elements to develop human resources is to develop the individual's health and his or her education, right? So, in other words, when you develop the healthcare system, whether it be primary and secondary healthcare, it means that you are actually creating a healthy population that is able to work. A healthy workforce is important, okay? An educated workforce means that you are developing the skills and the education, the know-how of the individuals, so that they can go out and be productive in two ways. They can be healthy and they could be skillful, right? Therefore, they can create wealth. All right. So, if we continue, we have the need for developing human resources, and here it is outlined clearly. Creates productive workers, creative and critical thinking, problem-solving skills, positive values and attitudes. Okay, so productive workers basically. Okay, and developing healthcare and human development. Now, firstly, you have to know the different levels of healthcare. Firstly, we have primary healthcare, provided at a national level and is concerned with the prevention of illness and disease and the promotion of well-being and health. Preventative healthcare includes the provision of public education about diseases and conditions, immunization, environmental sanitation, safe drinking water, dental and vision care, care for older people, recreational facilities, pre and postnatal care. These things might seem or sound familiar to you because primary health care or preventative health care is provided in our community, in each community. So whatever your community is, if we take for instance, we're in Trinidad, and if you are in Rio Claro, if you are in Mayaro, if you are in different communities, you would be able to access primary health care, meaning that you would be able to get immunization, environmental sanitation, right? And then they would make sure that you have safe drinking water, dental and vision care, care for old people, so they would have different days for all these different healthcare that they need to. So primary healthcare is very important because it actually is preventative healthcare. If people are able to access primary healthcare, this would help them to prevent a lot of diseases and be able to live a longer life, because you actually have primary healthcare for pre and postnatal care. So before an individual is even born, they have access to healthcare. Postnatal care is when the child is born and they have to get immunization, and immunization goes on for the lifespan of the individual, right? Some immunizations are given once in your lifetime, and some you have to go and update it. You have safe drinking water, dental care, etc., as we said before. Secondary and curative healthcare. These services are concerned with the detection, treatment, and cure of diseases and with the treatment of injuries. It provides such things as hospitals, clinics, and health centers, diagnosis of diseases and other ailments, referrals to specialized services, administration of medication, treatment, therapy, counseling, quarantine, and rehabilitation services. So secondary and curative healthcare deals with basically serious situations where you might need surgery, you might need some sort of specialized service that the primary healthcare cannot deal with. So curative, so this is when something actually happens to you and you need further assistance that the health centers cannot provide. So we basically, most secondary healthcare is done at hospitals, right? So diagnosis of diseases and other ailments, right? Referral to specialized services, administration of medication, treatment, therapy, counseling, quarantine, and rehabilitation services. Education and development of resources. Now, again, previously we said the two most important things to develop human resources is one, healthcare, which we just spoke about, which is primary and secondary healthcare. And then the second thing to develop human resources, education. So education is universally acknowledged as the means by which an individual can improve his or her own situation and also make a positive contribution to a country's development. Education is also often linked to improved health, partly because of increased knowledge of nutrition and disease prevention. In the Caribbean, education takes place at 4 levels: early childhood, primary, secondary, and tertiary. Functions of education. Now we can go back a little bit. So we have different levels of education that you should actually try to learn. You have early childhood, that's like kindergarten, right? Then you have primary, what we call primary school. You have secondary school, like high school, and then you have tertiary, that's like college, universities, etc. Right? Functions of education: prepare people to function effectively and to meet the challenges of society. Facilitates the continuous development of literacy, numeracy, and technical skills. Preserves, transmits, and transforms cultural norms and values of society. Prepares individuals for the world of work, which is an important one to remember and an important one indeed for people to consider for questions for your past paper practices and for your examination. Facilitates the development of life skills. Okay, so with education, people would say, okay, well, you have common sense or whatever, but with education, it also helps to develop life skills, because the education system actually imitates life and society and the workplace in terms of its functionality, in terms of reaching a place at a certain time, having a break time, a lunch time, uniform, dress code, badges, things like a boss, a principal. You can compare it down the line and think about it. It is quite similar, right? You also have punishment, rewards, etc. Okay, so it develops life skills, prepares individual for the world of work, and basically prepares people to function effectively to meet the challenges of society. Types of education: you have basic education, provides teaching and learning about literacy, numeracy, and a range of other subjects. This helps people to function in society. You have moral education, passing on society's morals and values. This is assisted by the church. So you can't get education by going to a religious organization. Vocational and professional training provides learning that is specifically tailored to prepare a person for their chosen line of work. Adult education, intended to help adults obtain skills they did not acquire when they were younger, or gain additional skills and qualifications. So some of those are self-explanatory. So if we move on, we have employment, unemployment, and underemployment. So we have definitions for these. Now these definitions can come for paper 2 or for paper 1, right? So on employment, a person is paid for work that they do. Okay, employment. Unemployment, if a person is available for work. So that part is important for you to put in. If a person is available for work but does not have any. Underemployment, people who are working at jobs and do not fully utilize their skills. So in other words, if you have somebody who has a university degree and who is probably bagging groceries, okay, that is underemployment, right? And unemployment would be like somebody who is willing to work, who is capable of working and does not have a job. Ability and use of capital. Now this might seem, sometimes you have information like this in social studies that you might think is basically business or principles of business, but it is also important for you to learn. Capital is the money or stock available to a company or person when starting a business, and that is available to continue to expand the business. The greater the capital available, the greater the number of employment opportunities that can be created. So why we have to learn this? It is because that if our country doesn't have a capital or people who are able to invest capital in businesses, that will create a issue with employment. So it leads back to human resources leads back to employment, and it leads back to actually harnessing resources, developing our resources, developing wealth. Because first, in order to do that, apart from education, etc., we also have to have capital to invest. Okay, so if we don't have capital to invest, then again we might rely on foreign companies, etc. Supply and demand in the skills or labor market. At different times, there can be a high demand for certain skills to the point where individuals are recruited from overseas. So sometimes in our country, we employ nurses and doctors, etc., from overseas because there's a high demand for certain skills, right? Too many people with the same set of skills for the jobs available. This might lead to unemployment and underemployment. So the other aspect of it is that sometimes we have too many people with the same set of skills for jobs available, right? So it might lead to unemployment. So people might go to universities, etc., and gain a high level of education, after which point they are unable to get a job to suit their qualification because there is a glut in the market for the type of skills that they have. There are too many people with the same skill set. So types of employment, we have primary industries, which include mining and agriculture. And one way to remember this, primary comes from primary employment is employment that deals with harnessing resources from the land or the ocean. So anything to deal with harnessing resources from the land or the ocean, like agriculture, fishing, mining, etc., that will be primary industry. So, and then you have secondary industry, includes processing and manufacturing. So secondary industry is basically creating of goods from primary production. So in other words, if somebody actually catch fishes for a living, then that person would be dealing with primary industry. Whereas if somebody is taking the fish and canning it to sell over, that will be secondary industries. Okay. Now, tertiary industries include services such as banking and tourism, and even selling the canned product, right? Like probably having a grocery, which is a service. Okay, so primary industry, if you take it with the same idea of the fish, primary would be catching the fish, secondary would be canning the fish, and tertiary would be selling the fish. Okay, so tertiary is really service. Primary is harnessing the resource. Secondary is manufacturing the resource into something else that can be used by humans, right, or individuals, etc. And tertiary would be providing services, even teaching people who are doctors, bankers, insurance agents, etc. All of these people are in tertiary industries. Okay, so types of employment. You have cyclical, a downturn in economic activity in a given area. This happens sometimes with tourism, as well as seasonal, deals with tourism as well. The end of periods of economic activity such as crop or tourist season. So if somebody is dealing in a certain crop and it only bears at a certain time of the year, they will have seasonal employment. Casual or temporary employment. Casual workers often have periods of unemployment between jobs. Normal, when those normally fully employed are out of work. Structural, fall in demand for one type of product or service. Technological, automation, mechanization, computerization. Now technological unemployment is something that has been becoming popular within the last century or so, with the advent of mechanization, where human beings are being replaced by computers, machines, and automated machines where sometimes you might need just one person to replace many people. Okay, so causes of unemployment in the Caribbean. The growth of Caribbean economies is not great enough to meet the demand for jobs. Right, so we have, meaning that we have limited growth. So as many people are going out and seeking education, sometimes it is difficult for the economies to supply the jobs that these graduates actually seek. Mechanized and capital intensive business are growing, meaning a lot of businesses are turning to machines and machines, basically, because mechanized and capital intensive is basically saying the same thing. It means that businesses are using more machines than human beings to do jobs, right? Because labor intensive means that you would use more humans, okay? Right? So in other words, if you are a farmer, probably instead of hiring 5 people to clear down your land, you might tell yourself, okay, well, I will actually use a machinery to do it, okay? And do it in a day's time or what have you, okay? So lack of regional integration makes global competition difficult. So we have regional integration, but not everybody actually is for it or understand it or actually takes part in it. So therefore, as much as the governments actually provide freedom of movement, etc., right, freedom of movement of labor, capital, etc., as we would do when we do regional integration, a lot of people are not taking advantage of it. Young people leave school with insufficient training in new technology, meaning that the education system keep regurgitating the same thing over and over, the same type of training over and over. Sometimes I would have to admit that CXE have introduced new subjects to deal with the change in the business environment, etc. Alright, however, it might take some time for graduates to actually catch up and for our society to benefit from some of these new skills. Some individuals may lack the skills and ability to enable them to work, and they are said to be unemployable, meaning that they're just not qualified to do anything. Right? Rights and responsibilities of workers. Right? So workers actually really do have rights and responsibilities, not only rights but responsibilities. Employees have a right to be paid for any work they do in accordance with agreed terms, be provided with good quality tools and equipment necessary for their work, a safe and clean working environment, freely join a trade, paid holiday periods, agreed maternity leave, equal pay and conditions, a clearly defined job description. Now I just want to remind you all, because this is a video tutorial, you can pause, you can rewind, etc. to take a look at the note. You can jot down important information as you see as we go along, etc. I'm moving along. Employees have a responsibility to carry out their duties in accordance with agreed terms, use tools and equipment in a manner that does not damage these or expose other workers to danger, help to keep the workplace safe and clean, use time for which they have been paid solely for work and not any other purpose, avoid using their employer's tools and equipment for personal use or profit, ensure property of the employer does not leave the premises without permission. Okay, so employees do have responsibility as well. So as you see here, the next heading is natural resources. We would continue with that tutorial next day. Okay, so this would be a little bit long as well. It may take us more than one session to do, but today our assignment would be based on resources. Resources being a big topic, meaning that it shouldn't take us 1 week to just do enough questions. We need 2 or 3 weeks to do questions, and to also in the questions as well, what I would try to do is probably go through some of the questions with you all as well, so that you would be able to know how to best answer them in the future. Okay, so look out for your assignment and continue reading from your textbooks as well. Don't forget your textbooks, and remember to learn definitions. That is important, etc. Okay.